In a relationship, when is honesty not the best policy? How do you balance what you want versus what you need? And is there something you need to say to your spouse but can't find the right way to say it? If so, then you're in the right place. This is the Lunch with Sandy podcast. With nearly 20 years of marriage under their belts, Terrance and Sandy Jackson discuss a range of topics, provide valuable insights on relationships, and talk about the conversations married couples need to have. So what does lunch have to do with all of this? Well, it's a metaphor for how these conversations originally started. Speaking of conversations, let's get one going. Here's your hosts, Terrance and Sandy.
Hello and welcome to the Lunch with Sandy podcast. I'm Terrance.
And I'm Sandy.
And here on the Lunch with Sandy podcast, we have the conversations that married couples need to have. Now, I'm about to ask Sandy a question, and I always can predict what her response is going to be. It's going to be short and sweet. Sandy, how you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful.
There it is, folks. Wonderful. One of these days, she's going to expand that out, and she's going to have a soliloquy where she's going to tell us exactly how she's doing.
I'm not good with idle chit-chat.
You're not good with idle chit-chat? You're not good with how you doing? You know how many times a day people ask how you doing?
I know, and I always give them the same response.
Well.
Living the dream.
As a little insight as to what we're going to get in today, we're going to discuss whether or not there exists a language barrier at times between couples. But before we do that, and now that we've gotten through you living the dream,
Of course, it's sarcastic.
I'm going to get into the spotlight of the week. And, you know, the spotlight of the week is how we start every show. And we select a person, place, or thing that we want to shine light on, whether it be for one particular reason or another. And the spotlight of this week are all sports social clubs.
Okay.
And I'm going to tell you why. I had a conversation with Greg yesterday. He's on a dragon boat team. He does dragon boat, and they travel and they compete and all of those things. And obviously it's a club, but the club has members and boards. And we were discussing yesterday some of the challenges and how much time being involved in one of those can take up, particularly when you're on a particular board. And it basically came down to there's a lot that's being asked of him. There's a lot that's there. The situation is he's providing insight that is coming from members of the club, and the board is just ignoring him. So I want to shine a light on all those clubs out there. What's the point of having members and having individuals that you ask to assist you
And then not listening
to them? Listen to those individuals. Now that we got that out of the way.
I think sometimes people think that they know better than everybody else.
Well, I think that's all the time. I do believe that's all the time. So we have had a number of discussions and conversations where we've talked about how communication is very important, very effective, and it is one of the core pieces to having a healthy relationship.
Yep.
But there are times where there can exist a situation where that communication is not as effective as it could be.
Yeah.
And I'm going to break down.
It's probably quite often.
Well, yeah.
You try.
But there's one situation where as much as you try, the possibility exists that you might run into an issue.
Okay.
And that's when two parties are in between a language barrier. When I say language barrier, I'm not talking about actual language. I'm talking about there are times, and I got to make sure I state this because someone tried to get at me before we started this. There are times where men and women speak different languages.
Yeah, like the whole saying of men are from Mars and women are from Venus. Right?
Yes. And it's partly because when it comes to certain things, we're wired differently.
Mm-hmm.
I think that from the perspective of being a male myself, we tend to communicate very, very directly and very, very short. By that, what I mean, as least amount of words as possible. You ask me a question, you're probably going to get a 1 or 2 word answer. And that 2-word answer will probably be very detailed, but it is going to be short.
You're talking about like my long-winded summaries.
Your summary, listen, the challenge that I have, and I'm going to speak for myself, the challenge that I have is we do speak the different languages.
Oh, and I most definitely speak different
and
languages.
when you say something, it is so long that the point that you make, if you don't make it in the beginning, is going to get lost. Because you'll make a point, and then
I need you to know the background.
You'll tell the background. You'll tell the background's background. You'll give the background of somebody who I don't even know.
I don't know about that, but, you know, I got to set the stage, tell the story. How do you have the full, you know, story if I'm not recanting it correctly?
Well,
and
I
with
think
enough detail.
I think that at times you want to tell a story, but I think one of the differences at times between men and women when we're talking about that language barrier is, again, like I said, when I speak, I'm very detailed. Sometimes we have a conversation, and when you start speaking, you're vague. And when I say vague, I don't mean vague in a sense I mean it's more abstract.
Okay.
And when it's abstract, you have to be able to interpret what it is that you're really trying to pinpoint.
So, yeah, I guess.
Facts.
I don't know. I don't feel like I'm that vague. However, if I give you a 1-word answer like yes, no, then you ask me because you think something's wrong.
No, that's not always the case. So a lot of times you don't give me an answer. And that's when I'm like, all right, well, you're not giving me anything. There are times. So how many times have we had a conversation and you'll say something,
yes.
You'll say something, and then I'll repeat it and you'll say, well, that's not what I meant.
Yeah. Well, that's because you're interpreting it differently. That's not.
Well, see, there's the thing. When I say you're abstract and when I say the fact that, you know, it's vague, if you were direct, I wouldn't have to interpret.
I don't know. I think I'm pretty direct.
Well, I think that's.
Say, you know, I like to hear I love you, not just you showing it, right? I think that's pretty direct.
And now you're going a bit off topic here. So let's we're making this all about us. Let's bring it back for a second. The point that I'm making is when you have a situation where at times, and I'm not trying to generalize all times, at times there are people who speak very directly and there are people who are more abstract. And when there's that abstract aspect of it and you're communicating with someone who is direct, there has to be some level of interpretation there. And unless you have been in a situation where you have enough experience with that individual to know exactly what they mean or have a roundabout idea of what they mean when they're being abstract, there can be a barrier or a miscommunication in that situation.
Well, I definitely feel like maybe sometimes there's I don't want to use the word disconnect, but it's a longer path when it goes from my brain to my mouth.
So listen, I'm glad you said that. Now, if that is a fact, and I'm going to take it as a fact, the longer path it takes to go from your brain to your mouth, when it comes out of your mouth, it took so long to get there that what comes out might not be originally what you were actually thinking. Because
I'm usually thinking like 5 different things at once.
Yeah, we'll see.
I'm thinking of like maybe 5 different scenarios or whatever, but my brain thinks very, very logical and very, I don't even know like what the word is, but at work, I tell people all the time, my brain thinks of like an Excel formula. So like
let me ask you.
If and then, oh my goodness, I can't get it out. If and statement. If this, then that.
That's a if and then statement.
Yeah. Oh my God, yeah.
So let me ask you this, and this is a personal question. Does your mind think in Portuguese and you try to convert it to English? Is that the long path that's coming out?
Maybe it's translating consistently. Maybe it's starting in English, translating to Portuguese, and then translating to
that
English
would
again.
make a lot of sense. That would explain a lot. So anyway,
But no, maybe because it's thinking in Excel formulas, but then I can't speak in Excel formulas, so it tries to translate that.
all right. Here's what we're going to do.
I'll go with that versus
Okay.
the English and Portuguese.
Enough about you. Let me ask you this question. So obviously I know a lot of guys. And
Do you?
I know a lot of people. You know what I mean? And I would say it's probably 50-50. But anyway, the point that I'm trying to make is when we communicate, we use a lot of facts.
Mm-hmm.
This happened here. I don't do this because of A, B, or C. On the female side, do you think that women communicate more from a factual perspective or from that abstract perspective of like, I'm trying to find a good example, like, it would be nice if it didn't rain today. Whereas I would say, it's not raining today. I'm trying to put myself in the mind of a woman, and I've never been one, so it's kind of difficult, and that's why I have you here as my counterpart.
I think we can think in the abstract, but I can't say that we just don't.
Well, I think everyone can think in the abstract.
Factually.
I know that there are times when you speak abstractly, and when you have to do that interpretation, and we've covered this, I think there can be a gap in that communication that can make that communication less effective or take longer to get from, like you said, to get from your brain to your mouth. So
me as a woman, I would say, for me, it's, I don't speak factually because there's so many things that I discuss that aren't necessarily factual.
Yeah,
and everything is factual until you deny that fact. So
yeah,
for me, it's like, oh, I read this article today, and I'll go into like, this is what they say, and and it's not like, oh, I read this article. Did you know that the world is flat?
Yeah, when I say factual, I don't mean that women don't communicate using facts. What I'm saying is from a speech pattern perspective, when we talk, it's typically, John fell out of his car today. From a conversation perspective, when we talk, we tend to speak about factual things. Not to say that you don't speak about factual things, but it's not.
So do you think maybe it's more that we speak with more emotion?
Well, I think that's 100%.
So can you believe it? Oh my goodness, John fell out of his car today.
I do think that
Not
at
just
times,
John fell out of his car today.
I do think at times that there's more of an emotional aspect when women speak. Mm-hmm. And I think, I can speak for myself. I know for a fact that a lot of times when I speak, there is a lack of emotion.
Right.
And I think that sometimes that can cause an issue because that lack of emotion can be interpreted as me not caring. It's not that I'm not, and that's not me not being a Karen, me not caring. Right. It's not that I'm not caring. It's just when I speak, I tend to speak facts.
Right. Yeah, it's not one person being more emotional over the other. It's speaking more emotionally, I guess.
Yeah. So do you think that when you talk about women speaking more emotionally, is there more variation in the tone when they actually speak?
Probably. Because how do you express like that emotion in the conversation as you're telling the story in a monotone? Well, I guess it can be done.
You can use your face. But you can express emotions a lot of ways. Use your hands.
Yeah.
I do think it'd be weird if someone is very amped up. And they're speaking like this and their hands are just flying all over the place. It would look a little weird.
And then they're speaking monotone. That would be
listen.
Monotone and their body language is just like completely amped up. I'd like to see that happen.
All right. So I know it's been a challenge, particularly for us right now, to try to come up with specific examples of how at times men and women use language differently.
Mm-hmm.
So the question that I'm going to ask is this: when that does arise, what's the best way, or what are some ways to actually get on the same page or get back to speaking the same language?
Go in your separate corners and get your thoughts together, I guess. I don't know.
You look at everything as a fight. Go to the corner, wait for the bell to come out. Ding, ding, ding.
That's not how I meant it, but
I do
I see how you
believe
could
that
interpret
stepping
that.
away, I do believe that stepping away and coming back can help. As long as when you go to your corner, you start thinking about what it is that person said and who that person is.
Yeah.
And I say who that person is because a lot of times if you just go by what the person said and you don't take into context who the person is and what their relation is to you, then I think you can put yourself in a situation where you misinterpreted what was meant.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, you know, I say it all the time, particularly say what you mean. I try to say what I mean all the time. And again, sometimes you speak more in the abstract and your meaning is not coming out within the word. So if you get that opportunity to go to your separate corners.
Would it have been better if I said just look each other in the eyes for a minute straight?
Nah, that's weird.
Say anything.
That's weird. That's weird.
That's weird.
Getting back on track. You look it in the eyes. There also is the possibility of just writing what you really want to say down. And I say write it down because when you take the time to write things down and you start thinking about it, your thoughts tend to, I'm waiting to hear what your response is. Your thoughts tend to be a bit more clear, or if they're not, you can look at them and then say, okay, well, this is what I'm trying to say, and then get the opportunity to edit and refine what it is that you're trying to say.
Well, I just think it's funny because I speak and I write very differently. My writing is very to the point.
Well, maybe you should write more.
For me, when I'm writing, I can't like add like fluff. I don't know what it is, but like what it is I'm trying to say is done in the matter of like a couple of sentences. Where when I'm speaking, I think go much longer.
I think I'm going to move for you to write everything down because when you speak, there's a lot of extra stuff there. A lot of extra stuff there. And I'm always like, all right, well, that has nothing to do with what this is about. And you'll say, oh, yeah, but I know. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Again, I got to set the stage.
Yeah, set the stage. Set the stage.
How can I convey something to you without giving you all the background on it?
Because the background is irrelevant. We're not asking about the background. But putting this stuff on paper, I think, makes it easier for you to express your thoughts clearly. And if it's on paper and you hand it to someone and they start to read it, they can choose whether or not they want to read that long background piece that you've actually entered or not.
I guess. Well, I guess there's plenty of times I type something up and I delete it all and then start over.
Yeah.
I guess maybe it would help. Get out all your frustration out at once.
Yeah.
Delete it and then write.
And then the other thing that you can try is you can try to learn to speak the other person's language. And I don't know how well that would work. I don't know if I can invest, that much time in trying to speak like you. I think it would be a whole retraining.
Worse than trying to learn a foreign language.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Listen, from the perspective of learning a foreign language, there is a format there. You know what I mean? There are rules. There are no rules when you try to learn someone else's language.
Yeah.
A lot of that stuff is made up.
I guess you're right.
One technique that you can use, and this is, I'm sure everyone knows this technique, is when someone says something to you, you repeat it is what they said.
Yeah.
And from that perspective, that person then has a chance to clarify, well, yeah, that's what I said and that's what I meant. Or, yeah, that's what I said, but I didn't mean that.
Which is funny because I feel like I definitely communicate differently at work than at home. Because, meetings, constantly doing that. So what you're telling me is blank.
Yep.
But I guess I don't put that into practice as much, or we don't put that into practice as much at home.
Yeah, well, what happens
guess that's
is
something we have to get better at.
Well, yeah, you can always get better. Or
I think I'm just all communicated out by the time I get home.
some of that communication is just not. I listen. At times we have effective communication.
Yeah.
At times we don't. I mean, there's some times where you say something and it goes in one ear and out the other ear. I'm being honest. Not the important stuff. It's just that when you start with the extra stuff, that's when it kind of.
Yeah, but the important stuff is mixed in with the extra stuff. You have to listen to the whole thing.
That's why you got to be direct. You got to be direct. You see how direct that is?
You're going to start setting a timer for me? How about that? Is that another suggestion?
5 seconds, go.
5 seconds
3,
is a short time.
2,
But,
1. That's it.
You got a minute to communicate what it is you're trying to communicate. And then I can just watch that timer count down.
Hey, listen, sometimes you just get a short amount of time to say what it is you have to say. Listen, and if you get your message across, that's effective communication.
Yeah.
And if you don't, it's not. The truth of the matter is, at times, men and women communicate, speak different languages. It just is what it is. As you stated earlier, they say men are from Mars and women are from Venus. And I'm pretty sure on those planets, they don't speak the same language.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, so in those cases, when you just can't seem to get on the same page, go back and listen to this and follow some of those techniques to get you through, to break down that language barrier. But I'm going to get to my realization of the week. I heard this expression a few months ago, and it's starting to really hit home. And I can't remember who said it, but I used it yesterday when I had lunch with some fellows. And the expression goes, goals without plans are just dreams. And I want you to think about that for a second. There are a number of things that we've been talking about, we've been dreaming about. And although we've been talking about them up until recently, we didn't have any plans in place. That's why when we got back from vacation, when we sat down, I said, listen, we really have to start putting things in motion so we can actually start hitting these goals. Because if we don't, we're going to dream about these things. And ultimately, they're just going to be just dreams. It becomes
a reality.
Yeah. So if you want to really hit those goals and you don't want them to just be dreams, you got to start planning. You got to start putting things in motion. You got to start making sure you're doing the things that you need to do to make sure that your dreams are going to come true.
That's it for this week's episode of the Lunch with Sandy podcast. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear your feedback and comments on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Lunch with Sandy. And be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to rate and review us. Thanks again for listening to the Lunch with Sandy podcast.